الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد الصادق الأمين المبعوث رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله الطاهرين الطيبين وعلى أصحابه أجمعين وعلى أزواجه أمهات المؤمنين وعلى ذريته إلى يوم الدين. سبحانك اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا اللهم علما وعملا متقبلا آمين يا رب العالمين. وبالإسناد متصل إلى الإمام al-Habib عبد الرحمن بن عبد الله بالفقيه الحسيني الحضرمي التريمي رحمه الله تعالى ونفعنا به آمين. قال في كتابه 40 حديثا في فضل القرآن العظيم الحديث الخامس عشر عن عبد الله بن عمر بن الخطاب رضي الله تعالى عنهما قال: قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم: لا حسد إلا على اثنين. There is no jealousy that is allowed except for two things or two types. Here, types of people. رجل أتاه الله أو آتاه الله.
رجل آتاه.
رجل. Yes. Yes, both are correct. Depending whether you treat it as a mubtada, it would be مرفوع رجل. يعني هو رجل. الأول رجل. يعني it is a man who, or the first type is a man who, to be خبر. خبر of a مبتدا محذوف, of a suppressed inchoative. So the enunciative is the خبر. Or it could be accusative also. أعني رجلا, I mean a man who. So that would be منصوب. Or مجرور in the genitive, رجل, as a بدل. لا حسد إلا على اثنين, two types. رجل يعني أي رجل, or بدل يعني as a substitute for اثنين. على رجل, على رجل آتاه الله. So you have آتاه or أتاه. آتاه. آتاه الله القرآن, whom Allah gave the Qur'an. فهو يقرأ به آناء الليل والنهار. Allah has enabled him to memorize the Qur'an and to be able to recite it fluently, or to read it fluently, easily, or beautifully as well. So he reads it and recites it at all times of the night and the day. وَرَجُلٍ آتَاهُ اللَّهُ مَالًا. And the second type is a person who, يعني رجل here means a man or a woman. آتاه الله مالا, Allah gave them wealth. فهو ينفق منه آناء الليل والنهار. So he or she spends out of it at all times of the night and the day. No. رواه البخاري ومسلم. الحديث السادس عشر, the 16th hadith, عن عبد الله بن بريدة عن أبيه رضي الله تعالى عنهما. That would be بريدة الأسلمي. قال: قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: تعلموا سورة البقرة. Learn the surah of the cow. the second surah of the Quran, Surah al-Baqarah, which is the longest surah with 286 verses by the count of the people of Kufa, yani the scholars of Kufa, which is in the Mus'haf that we use most commonly. 286 verses. There are other counts, 285, 287. So depending on whether you count this and that as a single ayah or two ayahs, Alif Lam Mim ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه, and so forth. So this explains the different counts of the people of Sham, for example, on the one hand, the people of the Haramain, Mecca and Medina has two different counts also that are usually the same, and the people of Basra, which is different from the people of Kufa, both being from Iraq, but they are not, they are frequently different counts. So Mecca and Medina, Basra, Syro-Palestine, and Kufa. I think these are the main ones. So you can look up books like Imam Abu Amr al-Dani of the 4th century, البيان في عد آي القرآن. آي يعني آيات. البيان في عد آي القرآن. And there's other books also. There's a book by اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وسلم, a large book which also covers all of the differences in the counts of even of the letters of the Quran and the words of the Quran and the verses of the Quran. So I remember اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد. طيب. We read this one before. He said that the Prophet ﷺ said, learn the surah of Baqarah, for verily فَإِنَّ أَخْذَهَا بَرَكَةٌ, taking it is a blessing, وَتَرْكَهَا حَسْرَةٌ, and leaving it or neglecting it is sorrow and regret, وَلَا يَسْتَطِيعُهَا الْبَطَلَةُ, and magicians have no power around it. So they can do nothing against it. And this is where up to which point we read it when we first read it. But this version here is in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad and others, and it has a continuation. تعلموا سورة البقرة وآل عمران. Learn the surah, meaning the two surahs of Al-Baqarah and Al-Imran, the family or the house of Imran. فَإِنَّهُمَا الزَّهْرَوَانِ, for verily these two are shining ones. They are radiant surahs, luminous surahs. تُظِلَّانِ صَاحِبَهُمَا يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ, that will shade. They are luminous and yet they will shade those who have them, those who possess them or befriend them or keep them. They will shade them on the day of resurrection. كَأَنَّهُمَا غَمَامَتَانِ, as if they are two clouds. أَوْ غَيَايَتَانِ, same meaning. أَوْ فَرْقَانِ مِنْ طَيْرٍ صَوَافٍ, or two flocks of birds in rows. إلى الطير صافات ويقبضن, in rows and as in Surah An-Naba, they are in rows and they clasp their wings and release them flying. So this is a representation. And there are other representations, as we said, they will come arguing on behalf of their friends. So personification as well. So different representations of the surahs of the Quran. Because in the hereafter is not like this life. There is nothing except the names that can be compared, the names of fruit, for example, but it is nothing like this life. So the realities of time and space and images, dimensions and all that, it cannot be compared. So this is just a representation for us to understand that there will be benefit and goodness in that. وإن القرآن يكفي صاحبه يوم القيامة حين ينشق عنه قبره كالرجل الشاحب. And verily the Quran shall suffice whoever has it as a friend, as a companion. Shall suffice meaning it will be enough for you. Imagine rising from the grave in the wilderness of whatever the earth that is left at that time will look like. And in the night of a world where ash-shamsu kuwirat, the sun was folded up or eclipsed and taken away, removed. So it will be a horrifying time, and next to which we are now like walking on a bed of roses. This is nothing. The tests of that we go through nowadays, which are present and undeniable, is nothing in comparison. But look, even now we worry about tomorrow, about our need, about our mobility, about the air we breathe, or we may still breathe. But if you have the Quran as your friend, it will suffice you everything imaginable of the needs that you might experience, whether here in this life of tests or upon rising from the grave at that time when no one recognizes anyone else. Everyone is just afraid for themselves and for what is going to happen. And there is a graphic description here at the time when his grave will split open for that one to emerge from it, like a man who is shahib, yani emaciated, or having lost the flesh from his body to the hardship of travel or sickness or hunger. شاحب. فيقول هل تعرفني? So the Quran will say to him, do you recognize me? فيقول ما أعرفك. He will say, I do not know you. فيقول أنا صاحبك القرآن. I am your friend, the Quran. الذي أظمأتك في الهواجر. Me who kept you thirsty in the early al-hawajiri, يعني the plural of hajira, يعني staying up at night, or early in the morning. وأسهرت ليلك, and kept you up late at night. وَإِن كُلٌّ نَاظِرٌ مِنْ وَرَاءِ تِجَارَتِهِ. And everyone at that time was looking after their profits and gain from business and commerce. Everyone is running after their job, but you were running after me. وَإِنَّكَ الْيَوْمَ مِنْ وَرَاءِ كُلِّ تِجَارَةٍ لِي. And verily today, مِنْ وَرَاءِ كُلِّ تِجَارَةٍ لِي, you are today. Min wara'i could be behind or it could be in front. So wara is like khalf. It can have both meanings of in front and behind. Every commerce and every trade and every gain, mine. This is what you have. كل تجارة لي. من وراء كل تجارة لي. Okay. فيعطى الملك بيمينه, so he shall be given kingdom with his right hand or into his right hand, والخلد بشماله, and immortality in his left hand. ويوضع على رأسه تاج الوقار, and the crown of dignity and majesty shall be placed on his head. ويلبس والداه حلتين لا يقوم بهما الدنيا, and his parents shall be dressed with two tunics or robes, to evaluate which it would not be enough to bring all of the world and everything in it. Yani two tunics that are more valuable than everything in the world. Imagine. And what did they do? They're just the parents. The work was done by the son or the daughter, and they were the friends of the Qur'an. But because of the honor of the Qur'an, then the parents also will be rewarded with great gifts, magnificent gifts. So because of this hadith, actually, it was said that if you want to honor your parents, but they passed away, you learn the Qur'an, read the Qur'an, recite the Qur'an, memorize the Qur'an, study the Qur'an as much as you can, and on the day of resurrection, they will share in that honor that you have been given, to be busy with the Qur'an and to befriend the Qur'an. So if you want birr al-walidain after they have passed away, learn the Qur'an. فيقولان بما كسينا هذا, they will say, for what reason, or because of what did we do to earn this, or to be dressed with these robes. فيقال بأخذ ولدكما القرآن, by your child taking up the Qur'an, studying and learning and becoming a hafiz of the Qur'an. ثم يقال اقرأ, then it will be said to the child, their child, recite. واصعد, and climb up. في درج الجنة وغرفها, on the ladder of the garden of paradise and its palaces or its chambers. فهو في صعود ما دام يقرأ, so they will be climbing up and up for as long as they are reciting. So to the number of the 6,200 odd verses of the Quran, according also to Imam Abu Amr al-Dani and the vast majority of the scholars, 6,226 or so verses of the Quran. And this is at least what number of levels of paradise there are. More than 100, more than 1,000. Okay. Now, هذا كان أو ترتيلا. هذا كان أو ترتيلا. So we know now that the names for speed in reading is hadh, and for slowness tartil. So ورتل القرآن ترتيلا, and recite it articulately and slowly and deliberately. And this is how the Prophet ﷺ was instructed, and how he loved to recite the Quran slowly and deliberately and articulately. And this is what also ala mukthin means, ala mukth. So the mukth also is that slowness that makes the words detached from one another and clearly heard, so that they can be clearly understood. الحديث السابع عشر, the 17th hadith, عن أبي هريرة وأبي سعيد الخدري معا رضي الله تعالى عنهما قال, both of them said, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ثلاثة يوم القيامة, 3 on the day of resurrection, على كثيب من مسك أسود, shall be on a dune of black musk. 3 types of people, meaning on a dune of black musk. لا يهولهم الفزع, the great fear of the day of resurrection will not terrify them. ولا ينالهم الحساب, and the reckoning shall not reach them, meaning frighten them also, or intimidate them, daunt them. حتى يفرغ الله ما بين الناس, until Allah will finish with the reckoning of the people. The first type is رجل قرأ القرآن ابتغاء وجه الله عز وجل, recited a man who recited, or a woman who recited the Quran seeking the face of Allah Almighty. وأما به قوما, and was imam with it, with what he learned and memorized of the Quran, for a people, meaning leading them in prayer. وَهُمْ بِهِ رَاضُونَ, and they are well pleased with that imam. Well pleased because he is after their best interests. He serves them. سَيِّدُ الْقَوْمِ خَادِمُهُمْ, the leader of a people is their servant, always trying to support them, help them, and uplift them. And so the same with the function of leadership in prayer. وَرَجُلٌ أَذَّنَ فِي مَسْجِدٍ دُعَاءً إِلَى اللَّهِ ابْتِغَاءَ وَجْهِ اللَّهِ, and a man who raised adhan, adhana, to announce, which means here the technical adhan, the call to prayer, in a mosque, as a way to call people, du'a'an, da'a yad'u, to call. When you say come to prayer, you are calling people to the prayer. Hayya ala salat, hayya ala al-falah, come to success and prosperity in dunya and akhirah. So this is a dua also, but dua directed at the people, meaning you are calling them, say, oh people, come. So what we would call nida, an-nida. So it has the same sense here. To what? To Allah. A dua to Allah, ibtigha'a wajhillah, also seeking the face of Allah. So the Imam seeks the face of Allah, the Muazzin seeks the face of Allah. وَرَجُلٌ مَمْلُوكٌ, and a man who is a slave, or a woman also, at the time of slavery. And nowadays it has different forms. It is no longer in the open to actually own another human being for a price, and they are a slave who cannot own any property, and they are the property of their master or mistress. It is no longer like that, but there are also other forms of enslavement to situations where the person is also helpless, powerless, penniless, and at the mercy of whoever has power over them, economically and otherwise. So different types of slavery. So we open our eyes to that reality, and we realize also that that is an even greater injustice than the olden slavery, because the olden slavery, I mean under Islamic law and Islamic regulations in Islamic society that observed these laws, was much more humane. And as the Prophet ﷺ said, and the Sahaba after him also, they would say, well, Ashir, he's one of us, about their slaves, or she is one of us. So they are fed the same, they are clothed the same, they are befriended and treated gently, kindly. And they are our father and mother when they are older, our brothers, our sisters, our sons and daughters if they are the same age or younger. This is how the Prophet ﷺ would call them. He said to Fatima radiallahu anha, is your father, and he will serve you. When he brought her a slave to help her in her household chores. So the way that there was an interaction with slaves under Islamic culture was unimaginably different from what we know of the horrible institution of slavery in other cultures. Not that there were not excesses also in Islamic societies in later times, of course there were, and injustices right and left. But there were still laws that were expected to be followed, and to which people understood that they were bound, whether they obeyed them or not. So a man who is a slave was tested with slavery, ibtuliya bil-riqi, sorely tested, ibtila, a big test. Bil-riq, riq is slavery. And he is raqiq, another name for slave. Mamluk, meaning owned, from milk, property. Fit dunya. So that was the big test of that person in this life, in this world. And yet, فَلَمْ يَشْغَلْهُ ذَلِكَ عَنْ طَلَبِ الْآخِرَةِ. And yet this did not preoccupy him to the extent that he stopped looking for the hereafter. So that never prevented them from pursuing the next life, meaning with surrender to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the state where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put them. That does not mean that they are passively doing nothing about that state. Of course, Allah also encouraged slaves and their owners to abolish that state. To abolish that state through whatever economic means, not in a revolutionary way, but in a way that they could do without upheaval in their lives, or loss of, because slaves were considered property. So that property, just to get rid of it for the sake of freeing the slave, that would represent a loss to the owners, from which they might recover and they might not recover, whatever. So they want a compensation for that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, if the slave asks you for their freedom in exchange for compensation, then give it to them and help them out too. Give it to them and help them out. So the Sahaba al-Kiram understood from this, help them out towards the end of the installments of the amount that is agreed upon. So that is called the mukataba. In Surah Al-Nur, the mukataba is mentioned in that surah, and it is a contract, a written contract, or a writ of manumission, freeing the slave, that the master and the slave agree upon, and over time, not in one go. And in the Shafi'i mazhab, it has to be over time and in several installments, to give time to the slave so that they can gather some income, for example, through skill. If they can master a skill or a craft and sell wares and so forth and help out and so forth, they can do that, and the master helps in that, especially towards the end of the installments, by, for example, pardoning 1/3 or 1/4. So Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu said at least 1/4, and say Ibn Abbas said 1/3, and others would say 1/10, others more than 1/3 even. You see, so they carry the burden of that expenditure, and then even after it is all repaid in full, and now the person, that slave, is a free person, they continue helping them, especially at that time, actually, because they are all spent, they have nothing, so they do not just throw them into society helpless. They support them, and the Prophet ﷺ said they are your mawla now, they are your clients, they are you are their patron, you continue to be related to them. It is like a tribal relationship and a customary link that continues until they, or whatever party dies first, and they inherit from each other. They inherit from each other also. You see, so this is wala also in Islam, patronage and clientship. So the institution of slavery in Islam, even though the direction is towards abolishing, at the same time there are laws and strictures and protections that are all along that way towards the removal of slavery and the freeing of the person, and after the freeing of the person, helping upliftment of the individuals in the society from both sides of that relationship of a slave master. So here the emphasis is on also the fact that they are a Muslim person. The slave is a Muslim person, and also like you and me, all pursuing akhirah. And so that one will be rewarded together with the imam of the people and the muazzin of the mosque. الحديث الثامن عشر عن شداد بن أوس رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ما من مسلم يأخذ مضجعه. There is no Muslim that goes to bed ويقرأ سورة من كتاب الله تعالى and recites one surah of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala إلا وكل الله به ملكا, except Allah shall put in charge of him an angel. فلا يقربه شيء يؤذيه. So nothing that harms will approach that person حتى يهب من نومه, until they rise again from their sleep. رواه الإمام أحمد والترمذي. No. So for example, Surah al-Fatiha, Surah al-Ikhlas, and the Mu'awwizatayn, and or Ayat al-Kursi, anything and short like that, or longer if they are hafiz and they have a weird and so forth, and or Surah al-Hashr, Asma'ullah al-Husna, and they will have various rewards promised to them and protections and so on and so forth. So for example, Fatiha and Qul Huwallahu Ahad, Prophet ﷺ said it will be a protection for you from everything, unless Allah wrote for the person to be taken back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that night, and everything else you will be protected from. And Surah al-Hashr, then they will be a shaheed if they pass away that night. And this is why we read it after Maghrib, the Asma'ullah al-Husna, and after Fajr also. So it covers the night and it covers the day after you read them. الحديث التاسع عشر عن أنس رضي الله تعالى عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن البيت الذي يقرأ فيه القرآن يكثر خيره. Verily, the house in which the Qur'an is read and recited and studied has abundant khair in it. Khair. So what is the principal meaning of khair in the Qur'an and in the Arabic language? Al-khair, wealth and property. Al-khair. إن علمتم فيهم خيرا. If you know that there is if you know that there is goodness in them. So some scholars here, they interpreted, there is a narration from Ibn Abbas that he said in this verse that when the slave asks for their freedom and in exchange for a payment, a contract, which is the mukataba, give it to them if, on condition that you know that there is khair in them, there is goodness in them. So the majority of the scholars, they said that ability to fulfill that contract and trustworthiness and wafa, sidq, amana, and istita'a also, to repay. And others said mal, property, wealth. But from where the property and the wealth? The slave doesn't have property and wealth. From the ability to acquire it through expertise or skill that they have and the craft that they have mastered. Like, for example, to be a smith, blacksmith, or carpenter, or even, more skilled than that. For example, with medicine, with helping people in that way, or and other skills, sewing, for example, or agriculture, and so forth. So, khair can be wealth, and it can be goodness in general. And the principal goodness being in material terms would be wealth. So read the Quran, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send goodness to your house and your life. وَالْبَيْتُ الَّذِي لَا يُقْرَأُ فِيهِ الْقُرْآنُ يَقِلُّ خَيْرُهُ. And the house in which the Quran is not read, its khair will be little. الحديث العشرون, the 20th hadith. عن أبي موسى الأشعري رضي الله تعالى عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم مثل المؤمن الذي يقرأ القرآن مثل الأترجة. The example of the believer who recites the Quran is like the utrujja, the citrus fruit. Citrus fruit, يعني between the lemon and the orange, sweet lemon, the citrus fruit. طعمها طيب وريحها طيب. Its taste is good and its smell is good. I mean, the citrus fruit, if you just peel it open a little bit, you feel that fragrance. It is like a perfume. It's so good. And you haven't tasted it yet, and then it tastes very sweet as well. It's not tart like the lemon. It's actually sweet, but it's a sweet lemon. Now, وَمَثَلُ الْمُؤْمِنِ. So this is the believer who recites the Quran. وَمَثَلُ المؤمن الذي لا يقرأ القرآن مثل التمرة طعمها طيب ولا ريح لها. And the example of the believer who does not recite the Quran, who is unable to read the Quran, does not memorize the Quran, is like, his example is like the date. Its taste is sweet, but it does not have a smell. But its taste is sweet because he's a believer. So his taste is sweet, but does not have a smell. But reciting the Quran, that is like the fragrance also of the believer.
I have a mistake here in my text. It says ومثل المؤمن الذي لا يقرأ القرآن مثل التمرة طعمها طيب وريحها طيب. And then another line مثل التمرة طعمها طيب ولا ريح لها. It's an error here, I think. They typed an extra.
Yeah. Okay. Continuation of the hadith. ومثل الفاجر الذي يقرأ القرآن كمثل الريحانة. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد. And the example of the sinner, the open sinner who recites the Quran, is like a rayhana. I have citrus here also. What is utrujja then? اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد. There must be a difference between the two. It says ريحها طيب وطعمها مر. Its smell is good, but its taste is bitter. So that would be the lemon. That would be the bitter lemon. And its taste is bitter, but its smell is good. And the utrujja would be the sweet lemon. Now, وَمَثَلُ الْفَاجِرِ الَّذِي لَا يَقْرَأُ الْقُرْآنَ. And the example of the, and all this is, these are Muslims, right? The open sinner who does not read the Qur'an, كَمَثَلِ الْحَنْظَلَةِ. One that is an open sinner and does not read the Qur'an, their example is like the, so Hanzala can be translated as the colocynth, which is like a plant that is very bitter and repellent, and it has been translated also as the bitter apple also, or a desert gourd, the desert gourd. We don't have it here, I don't think. Anyway, the gourd is a bitter fruit also, and even the bitter gourd, even uncooked even more bitter than when cooked. But it is cooked in any way. It is bitter both ways. كمثل الحنظلة. So the hanzala is like the example of that type of person, and he not only does not read the Quran, but an open sinner as well. طعمها مر ولا ريح لها. Its taste is bitter and it has no smell. رواه البخاري ومسلم. So the author that I was thinking of is Qastallani, Imam Qastallani. He has a large book on the qira'at of the Quran, and a chapter on each surah covering the number of its verses. And I think it is called Lata'if al-Isharat. It has the same title as the name of the tafsir of Imam al-Qushayri, Lata'if al-Isharat, Qastallani. لطائف الإشارات في معرفة القراءات, or something to that effect, with قراءات in the title, and on the قراءات of the Holy Quran. الله أعلم. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. والحمد لله رب